The dog sat by the window, his brown eyes staring out into the world with a mixture of curiosity and longing. It had been weeks since he had arrived at his new home, and while he was treated with kindness and love by his adopted family, something was missing, something deep inside him, a connection he couldn't explain. He wasn't sure what it was, but every time he caught a glimpse of the people passing by or heard a car pull up in front of the house, his heart would race. Was it the sound of footsteps that made him excited, or was it something else? Something, he felt, was calling him, like a memory just beyond his reach, a piece of himself lost in time. Little did anyone know, this dog, affectionately named Max by his new owners, was about to embark on a journey that would change everything. A journey that would unravel hidden truths, bring buried secrets to the surface, and reveal a shocking discovery that no one, not even Max himself, had ever seen coming. Max's new family had adopted him from a local shelter. He was sweet, well-behaved, and had that undeniable charm that made him impossible to resist. The couple that took him in, Sarah and John, had always wanted a dog, but after years of moving around and living in apartments, they never had the chance to settle down enough to adopt one. But now, with their own house and a steady life, they were ready to give Max the home he deserved. They showered him with love, treats, and belly rubs, and for a while, Max seemed to adjust to his new life. He became part of the family. He had his favorite spot on the couch, his own bed by the door, and of course, his daily walks around the neighborhood. Sarah and John would often marvel at how well behaved he was, how gentle and loving, but there was always that nagging feeling they couldn't shake. Why did Max sometimes seem so distant, as if he was waiting for something or someone? And why did he react so strangely whenever certain people walked by the house? It wasn't just Max. Sarah and John both had moments when they felt as though there was something more to the story than they had been told at the shelter. Max's behavior, his attachment to certain places, and the way he would stare at the mailman, these little things, insignificant to most people, seemed to have a deeper meaning to them. But they brushed it off, thinking it was just the result of Max adjusting to his new life, his new family. But everything changed the day Max ran away. It was an ordinary morning when it happened. Sarah was out in the garden, trimming the hedges, while John was inside preparing breakfast. Max had been acting particularly restless that day, pacing back and forth by the door. Sarah noticed it but didn't think much of it. He had his quirky moments. But when she turned to check on him, she saw the door slightly ajar and the familiar brown and white dog nowhere to be found. Panic set in. Sarah's heart raced as she searched the yard, then the neighborhood, calling Max's name, but there was no sign of him. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. John joined the search, his voice cracking with worry as they canvassed the area, asking neighbors if they had seen him. Just when they were about to give up, a stranger appeared at the corner of the street. He was an older man, wearing a faded jacket and a cap, holding something in his hand. As he approached, he looked at Sarah and John, and without saying a word, he handed them a small, crumpled envelope. "You'll want to read this," he said, his voice low, almost as if he was afraid someone might overhear. Inside the envelope was a letter that would change everything. It was a simple note, but its contents were shocking. It was from a woman named Maria, someone claiming to know Max's true origins. The letter revealed that Max wasn't just a dog who had been abandoned or surrendered to the shelter. No, Max was a dog who had been stolen as a puppy, taken from his rightful family under circumstances that no one had ever spoken about. Maria explained that she had been searching for Max for years, never giving up hope of finding him again. She wrote that the dog was not only hers but that he had a brother, and together, they had been a part of a family that had been torn apart by tragedy. Max's story, as Sarah and John would soon learn, was far from ordinary. The truth about Max's past would uncover connections that no one could have anticipated. As they read through the letter, a sense of dread filled the air, and yet, a spark of hope flickered in Sarah's chest. Could this really be happening? Was Max's past finally coming to light? And if so, what did that mean for his future and for Sarah and John? Just as they were about to investigate further, a chilling realization hit them. If Maria knew about Max, then there was a chance others did too. And if they were looking for him, would they want him back? The mystery of Max's past was only beginning to unfold, and what lay ahead would push Sarah and John to the edge of their understanding. The decision they now faced wasn't just about keeping Max as their beloved dog, it was about what would happen if they discovered the truth about his family, his origins, and the people who had once claimed him as their own. But they didn't know everything yet. Not even close. The next day, when Sarah and John went to the shelter to ask about Max's past, they were met with a chilling silence. The staff members were unusually tight-lipped, their faces tense, as if they were hiding something they weren't ready to reveal. What was going on? Why were they acting so strangely? Could they really be hiding something about Max's origins? With every step they took toward uncovering the truth, they found themselves deeper in a web of secrets and lies. And just when they thought they were getting closer, something unexpected happened. Max disappeared again. This time, however, it wasn't just an ordinary escape. Something was different. There was a deliberate intent behind his actions, as if Max knew exactly where he needed to go and who he needed to find. The question was, what was he searching for? And who would find him first? As Sarah and John raced against time to figure out what was really happening with Max, the answer was just around the corner. But it would come with a price, one that they weren't prepared to pay. Max's journey was far from over, and the discovery of his real family was just the beginning. Would they be ready for the truth, no matter how painful? Could they keep him, knowing what they now knew, or would they have to let him go? And what about Max? Would he remember them as his true family, or was his heart forever tied to the ones he had lost so long ago? The mystery of Max's past was only the first layer of a story much deeper than anyone had expected. What happened next would leave Sarah and John and Max forever changed. The next few days after Max's second disappearance were a blur. Sarah and John had spent countless hours searching, calling, and posting flyers. Max's sudden absence was unlike the first time. This felt deliberate, almost like he had chosen to leave, as if he had finally remembered something he'd been missing. The more they looked for him, the more they realized something strange was happening. Max wasn't just wandering aimlessly. He was heading somewhere. The cryptic letter they had received from Maria still weighed heavily on their minds. Every part of them told them to trust it, but every part of them also feared the unknown. What would happen when Max met the family who claimed him? Would they take him away? Would he even want to return to Sarah and John? And then, the phone call came. It was late one evening when Sarah was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. John had gone out to get groceries, leaving her alone in the quiet house. The ringing of the phone startled her, and for a brief moment she hesitated, her heart racing. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but when she picked up, her breath caught in her throat. "Sarah?" a soft voice said. It was Maria. "Maria, I didn't expect to hear from you. Where's Max?" Sarah's words were rushed, full of both hope and fear. "He's with me," Maria replied, her voice calm but distant. "And he's been waiting for you, Sarah. He's been waiting for you both." The words hit Sarah like a wave, and 1,000 emotions flooded through her: relief, confusion, anger, and uncertainty. Where had Max been all this time? What had he been doing? And why was Maria telling her this now? "Where are you? What's going on?" Sarah managed to ask, her voice trembling. Maria paused before answering. "I think it's time you knew everything. About Max. About the family he came from." As Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, Maria continued, her tone now more serious, almost regretful. "When Max was taken from us as a puppy, it wasn't just a random act. He was part of something bigger, a group of people who, well, let's just say they weren't good people. Max and his brother were meant to be part of a breeding program for a dangerous group that had connections in places you wouldn't want to imagine. We were never supposed to have them. I was just a woman who wanted to protect them. When I found out what they were planning, I took them and ran. But I couldn't protect them forever. Sarah sat in stunned silence, her mind struggling to process the words. She felt sick to her stomach at the thought of Max, her sweet, lovable dog, being a part of something so dark. But Maria wasn't finished. Max's brother was killed in a terrible accident. I tried to keep him hidden, to keep him safe, but they were always looking for him. For both of them. I knew it wouldn't be long before they came for Max, and when they did, I had to let him go. I couldn't risk them finding us. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. The weight of the truth was unbearable. Maria wasn't just some stranger, she was Max's real mother. And the life she had led, the choices she had made, they had all led to this moment. I never wanted this for him, Maria continued, her voice breaking. But he's been through so much. I thought if I gave him to you, you could give him the life he deserved. But I never imagined you'd get so close. I didn't think you'd find me. Sarah's mind was reeling. Max had been a victim of something far bigger than she could have imagined. He hadn't just been abandoned, he had been taken from his real family and forced into a world of danger. But now, he was safe. And yet, she couldn't ignore the pang in her chest. Was Maria right? Was Max better off with them? Had she given him the best life she could? I don't know what to do, Sarah whispered, tears stinging her eyes. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I know. But you need to come to me. It's time Max knew the truth about where he came from. Sarah didn't know how she found the strength to drive, but she did. The road ahead was dark, winding, and unfamiliar, but she couldn't let this chance slip away. She had to find Max, to know for sure where he truly belonged. When she arrived at the address Maria had given her, she was met with a small house nestled in the woods, surrounded by trees that seemed to close in around it. The air felt heavy, as if it had witnessed things it shouldn't. She knocked on the door, her heart hammering in her chest. It felt like everything had led to this moment, and yet she had no idea what she would find. Maria answered the door, her face lined with years of worry and regret. She stepped aside, silently motioning for Sarah to enter. Inside, the house was cozy, but there was an air of sadness that clung to the walls. And there, on the floor, was Max. Max's eyes locked with Sarah's as soon as she stepped into the room. The connection between them was instant, undeniable. He ran to her, jumping up on her as if nothing had changed. The old, familiar spark was there, the love, the trust. But something was different now. Max was older, wiser, his gaze more serious. He knew more than he let on. Maria watched them quietly, her eyes full of sorrow. He remembers you. He always has. Max sat at Sarah's feet, his head resting against her leg as if he never wanted to leave. But there was a tension in the room, a sense that something still needed to be said. I've kept Max safe all these years, Maria continued, her voice shaky. But I know that he belongs with you. He's your dog now. I can't take him from you. The weight of the decision was almost too much to bear. Sarah had never imagined this moment would come. She had thought about it, feared it, but now that it was here, she realized there was no clear answer. Max had been a part of her life for so long. But Maria had given him life, had protected him when no one else could. She had done the impossible, and now, she was asking Sarah to make the hardest choice of all. Max's eyes flicked between them, and for a moment, Sarah wondered if he knew what was at stake. Could he decide for himself? Could he choose between the family that had raised him and the one that had lost him so many years ago? Just as Sarah opened her mouth to speak, there was a loud knock on the door. Maria's face strained of color. "No," she whispered under her breath. Before Sarah could react, the door was forced open, and a group of men in dark clothes stepped inside. Their faces were cold, determined. They weren't here to talk, they were here for Max. Maria stepped forward, trying to block them. "You're too late," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's already been found." But the men didn't listen. They pushed past her, their eyes locking onto Max. The world seemed to stop as Max stood, his ears flat against his head. He knew what was happening. His body tensed, but he didn't move. In that moment, everything changed. Max wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a survivor. And he wasn't about to be taken again. With a sudden burst of energy, Max bolted past the men, knocking one of them aside. He raced toward the back door, his body moving with the grace and speed of someone who had spent years running from the past. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. She ran after him, calling his name, but Max was already outside, disappearing into the trees. The men cursed and gave chase, but Sarah couldn't stop. She couldn't let Max face this alone. Through the dark forest they ran, the sound of the men's footsteps fading behind them. Max led her deeper into the woods, his instincts guiding him, his purpose clear. He was running towards something, a place where he truly belonged. And just when Sarah thought she couldn't go any further, she saw it, a small clearing, bathed in moonlight. In the center of it stood a figure, tall, familiar, but unexpected. It was John. Max had led them back to where they started. To their home. To the family he had always known. But this wasn't the ending anyone had expected. It was just the beginning. As Sarah stood there, panting, staring at John in the moonlit clearing, her heart raced. She hadn't expected to find him here, in this remote spot, especially not now, after everything that had happened. Max, who had just moments ago darted into the woods, had returned to the one place that had always been home. But it wasn't just the familiar surroundings that had drawn him back, it was John. John stepped forward slowly, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. His eyes met Sarah's, and without a word, he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. The events of the last few days had clearly taken their toll on both of them. In that brief moment, everything fell silent. The tension that had been building over the past weeks, the fear, the uncertainty, all of it dissolved in that simple embrace. Max, who had stopped just a few paces away, looked up at them, his tail wagging, his eyes filled with the same loyalty he had always shown. "I never wanted it to come to this," John finally said, his voice barely a whisper as he let go of Sarah. His hand brushed his face, and Sarah could see the guilt there. "I should have told you earlier." "John." "What do you mean? What's going on?" Sarah asked, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. John took a deep breath and looked down at Max, who was sitting quietly between them, his eyes shifting between both of them, as if waiting for the right moment. "I've known about Max's past," John admitted, his voice filled with regret. "I knew he wasn't just some random dog from the shelter. Maria came to me years ago, before we even adopted him. She told me everything about Max and his brother. About what happened to them. About why they were taken. I didn't know what to do, Sarah. I thought I could protect him, give him a normal life, and keep it all hidden." Sarah's heart sank. She had never imagined that John, the person she had trusted with everything, had known this much. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't we face this together?" she asked, her voice cracking. John's eyes filled with pain, and he took another step toward her. "I thought it would be better if you didn't know. I thought if we just kept him in the life we gave him, we could protect him. But as time went on, I realized it was wrong. Max deserves to know the truth. He deserves to know where he came from. And I couldn't keep lying to you anymore. There was a long pause as Sarah processed his words. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind about the past, about Max's family, about the life they had been living. But above all, she knew one thing for sure: Max wasn't just some dog. He was part of a story much bigger than any of them could have imagined. Max stood up, walking towards Sarah and John, his tail wagging again as he nudged Sarah's hand with his nose. She knelt down, petting him gently, feeling the warmth of his fur under her fingertips. Despite everything they had been through, despite all the pain and confusion, Max was still the same loyal dog they had brought into their lives. He was still their family. I think Max has known the truth all along, Sarah said softly, looking at John with a mixture of understanding and sorrow. He knew who he was, and he knew where he came from. He knew it wasn't just about us. It was about something much deeper, something that connected him to both worlds. John nodded, his expression solemn. I think you're right. And that's why he came back to us. He didn't want to be a part of the past anymore. He wanted to find where he truly belonged. Max looked up at both of them, his eyes full of trust and affection, and for a brief moment, Sarah realized that the answers to their questions weren't as important as the love they shared with him. It wasn't about bloodlines, or who had raised him, or who had made the decisions for him. It was about the bond they had formed, the family they had become, despite everything that had happened. The quiet of the forest settled around them as the weight of everything finally lifted. Max had found his place, and so had they. There would be no more secrets, no more running from the past. The future was still uncertain, but as they stood there, together in the clearing, Sarah realized that it didn't matter. They would face whatever came next as a family. As they made their way back home, the journey that had started with a lost dog and a mystery now felt like it was coming full circle. The twists and turns had brought them to this moment, the moment when everything, no matter how complicated or painful, made sense. But just as they reached the edge of the woods, with their house in sight, Sarah heard something she hadn't heard before. The sound of footsteps behind them. She turned, and for a moment, her breath caught in her throat. A figure was emerging from the shadows of the trees. It was Maria. Her presence was unexpected, and Sarah's first instinct was to protect the life they had built, to shield Max from any more of the chaos. But Maria's expression was one of quiet resolve, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and hope. I didn't come to take him, Maria said softly, her voice shaking slightly. I came to say goodbye. To let you know that he's safe. That he's found where he belongs. Sarah looked at Maria, seeing the woman not as a stranger, but as the mother who had tried, in her own way, to protect Max. She nodded slowly, understanding that this was the final piece of the puzzle. The woman who had once been Max's world was now letting him go, just as Sarah had to. They had both known the weight of that choice, the pain of letting go, but now it was time. Thank you, Sarah said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. Thank you for giving him the chance to be who he was meant to be. Maria's eyes softened, and for the first time in years she smiled. You're welcome. He's a good boy. He deserves everything. With that, Maria turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving Sarah and John standing together, with Max at their feet. There would be no more searching, no more running. The answers had been found, the journey had ended, and now they could begin their lives again together. As they walked back home, Max trotted happily beside them, his tail wagging in that familiar rhythm. Sarah and John exchanged a glance, and despite everything they had been through, despite the lies and the secrets, they knew this was the beginning of something new. A new chapter. A new life for all of them. And as the door to their home creaked open, they stepped inside, ready to start fresh, ready to embrace the future. Max had come back to them, and in doing so, he had reminded them of the most important thing in life: love, family, and the strength to move forward, no matter the past. The journey wasn't over, it had just begun. But for now, they had everything they needed. And that was enough.